Let's keep things moving here on the program. We're going to say hello to an old friend. I don't mean old, I mean like an old friend. He's been doing this with us for so long. Mike Wallace, senior editor of Grind City Media, been covering the NBA for in excess of 20 years, knows all things NBA, and of course, Grind City Media covers the Memphis Grizzlies like no other. As Mike joins us here on the program. What's going on, Mike Wallace?
Hey, what's going on? What's going on, D? Good to always be on with you, man. And as you always say, there's if I get a call from you to come on, that means some major stuff is going on. And there's a lot of action going on around the sports world.
There is. Let me start here. I got a twofold question for you, man, with respect to the Bucks. A, they let Griffin go, and there may have been some other underlining things because at the end of the day, you look at the record, even though we're not necessarily, or we may be right at the halfway point, it's a solid record. But then B, they hired Doc Rivers. Like, you got to help me understand both of these particular moves as it relates to the Bucks.
Now that we've had a couple of days to kind of dissect it and digest it, to me, the first thing it speaks of is, maybe there wasn't an all in and everyone was on board with the hiring of Adrian Griffin. When you talk about ownership and front office, there had to be some kind of split in terms of who was willing to support him. And because when you pull the carpet from under someone, 50, 45 games into the season and they're 30-13 at the time, second best record in the East on a winning streak when they do it, that tells you that this isn't necessarily about what's going on right there in that moment. There's some things that have been simmering under the surface and maybe even beyond the surface for a couple months now. Adrian Griffin is a brilliant brother. You know what I mean? He has a PhD, and he's articulate and he's cerebral in his approach. And sometimes that rubs some guys the wrong way. You know what I mean? He came in with his style, and it wasn't one that was easily embraceable by your two superstars. And frankly, that's been the case. And Milwaukee's had some injuries too. But, for the most part, this tells me that A, the front office and the ownership weren't really all collectively on board with the hire to begin with. And B, there was some disconnect between his superstars, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Damian Lillard, and the coaching staff. And then there was an upheaval that disrupted his coaching staff earlier this season when he had to let go, or when he had to issue what I believe it was Terry Stotts at that time, or not Terry Stotts, but he had an issue with one of his lead assistants that left the organization. So, hey, man, it's unfortunate. I've seen it happen before. And Doc Rivers now is a guy that's a big Band-Aid. They've invested $40-odd million in him over the next 3 years to try to fix it. And we'll see if he can get them over the top. He got Boston over the top, but he wasn't able to do it in LA with the Clippers, and he wasn't able to do it with the Philadelphia 76ers. So Doc will come in motivated. He's a Milwaukee Marquette guy, Chicago native. He knows that region. He knows the expectations, and we'll see if it works out.
Yeah, no doubt. I don't know. I guess I'm trying to figure out, is it going to get better with Doc Rivers? Because granted, he's won a championship. And generally when you win a championship, that gets you a lot of grace. But I think since that championship, he's done a lot of, or I'm not saying it's all his fault, but nothing has happened good for teams of Doc Rivers per se. As a matter of fact, you can look at all the Game 7 losses. You can look at the 3-1 leads that his teams have had and lost, the 3-2 lead going back to an opportunity to maybe make it to the finals with the Clippers. Like, what is it about Doc Rivers that teams keep hiring him, and specifically as it relates to the Bucks? Is it more about because of the two superstars that they had?
Well, I think, on the surface, Doc appears to have good relationships with his players. He knows how to play the media game. He's charismatic. He knows how to relate to the fans. And I go back to thinking every time I've seen Doc Rivers, whether he's at home or on the road, there's a time during every game where he turns around and talks to the front row, second row, third row fans during the game. You know what I mean? So he's one of those guys that is a clear communicator. What he wants to do. When he's in the timeout huddle, he's very direct, and it seems like he's a guy of accountability. Now, there's also an undercurrent in the NBA where there are several players who don't really like Doc Rivers' style and who says that it grates on them at a certain point, and there's a disconnect if you don't buy in. And after a couple seasons of him, guys tend to tune out. So, there's both sides of the Doc Rivers coin, but I do think he's a Hall of Fame coach. I mean, he's got 1,100 wins. He's got a championship. He's destined to be in the playoffs. He's been in the playoffs in the postseason everywhere he's gone. But he's also lost 3-1 leads 3 or 4 different times. He's lost a lot of game sevens, and that's not him. He's not on the court making plays, but at the end of the day, this is one thing that Milwaukee, I think, I don't know if they could have gotten better, but they had to get someone in there with a track record that can communicate. They can't take another gamble on a guy who has never been in this position before. It had to be a guy that's been around the league and has been through some of the wars that come with the NBA. So we'll see. I think, this hire can't be measured today. It can't be measured until maybe the second round of the playoffs. And that's when Doc Rivers, judgment day will come. Did he get these guys back to the conference finals at the very least? Because if they're not in the finals or the conference finals, it's a lost season.
Yeah, that's a good point. Mike Wallace, senior editor of Grind City Media, joining us here on the program. Pascal Siakam, the trade, he comes to Indiana. I've watched Indiana the last couple of years or so. I like what Indiana is doing. As a matter of fact, your thoughts, and let me ask you this: is Siakam worth 3 first rounders? And are we putting a different value? I'm not saying he can't play. I'm just saying, are we putting a different value on first rounders today than we have in years past?
The market is volatile in the NBA when it comes to first rounders because, you look at, I don't know if Kevin Durant went to Phoenix for 3 first rounders, right? It might have been 3, but if it was 3, they're 2 different kind of players, right? You know what I'm saying? Pascal Siakam is not Kevin Durant when it comes to value and what he brings to you and what he's capable of doing, even at Kevin Durant's stage and age at this point. So I think beauty is in the eye of the beholder when it comes to that. But like you said, this is not to begrudge Pascal Siakam. He's an all-star. He's a two-way player. He can defend at an elite level, and he can score in versatile ways. And it will help Indiana. You know what I mean? When you put him beside, Turner up front, and then obviously Halliburton and what they have in Indiana, with Mathurin and all of these other talented guys. Buddy Hield is still there. They have some firepower. Now the question is, can they defend? And will they be able to defend and get up and get into a series and win a series? That's going to be the question, because in the East, when you talk about Boston, Milwaukee, obviously, Philadelphia, New York is playing at an elite level for them. Those teams you don't want to see defensively in a 7-game series because they can shut the offense down. So that's what Indiana had to do. This was about them finding some balance on the other end of the floor. And I think it should bode well. Even though it didn't get off to a great start so far, it's going to take some time, which is why I think it was beneficial for Indiana to make the move now so they can use the last 2 months of the season to get into that rhythm on both ends of the floor.
Yeah, no, I think it was a really good move on Indiana's part because they're a solid. There's a solid team right there.
They are.
And in the East, I mean, wouldn't it also speak to? I mean, I'm just trying to think. Okay, we talked about the Bucks. The Cavaliers are right up there. I watched the Knicks play a really good game against Brooklyn. That was a really good basketball game the other night, right? Like Brooklyn's making some noise, but there's no, unless I'm missing something, there's no clear-cut team out of the Eastern Conference right now.
Well, Boston
the Celtics, I'm sorry.
To me, Boston and what they just lost for the first time at home to Denver last week in a phenomenal game that could be an NBA Finals preview. But they're a team that not many teams have reached their level of execution and balance and continuity. And they are the prohibitive favorites to me to win it all. And, this is a year where if Boston can't do it this year, I don't know if this mix will work in terms of championship. Now, they'll be a 60-win team every year. They'll get to the conference finals at least every year. But it's time for them to get a championship. Your payroll is astronomical now that you paid Brown and Tatum is going to come back up for another extension pretty soon. You got Porzingis on there now, and then you're augmenting that, with the guys that you bought in last couple of years in terms of Derek White and Holiday. So this is a win now for Boston. I do think I want to say they're as clear cut as you can get in the East right now, with a lot of teams doing relatively well. But you can go from 1 to 6 in the East And it wouldn't surprise me if any of those 6 teams made it to the NBA Finals representing the East. And you named them. You know, you got Boston, Philly, Milwaukee, New York, Cleveland. You know, Indiana can sneak up on you and do some things. Miami did it from the 8th seed last year, right? So it just goes on and on and on in terms of how these teams are lined up in the East.
Mike Wallace, I tried to tell Mike Bivens about Kristaps Porzingis. He wasn't too keen on him. But man, the guy, I mean, maybe he's not a true center, but he can block shot because of his height. He can block shots, rebound, and we know he can shoot. He's playing very well. I mean, he's a real integral part of the reason why the Celtics are where they are.
Yeah, he is. He is. And it's funny because, you know, we just got back from a 4-game trip that went through all the cold places, right? You know, we had a major storm in Memphis here, snowstorm. So we were in Memphis with 6 inches of snow and ice all over the place. Then you started a road trip going to Minnesota where it's -3. Then you go from Minnesota to Chicago where it's 1 or 2 degrees, right? And the lake is frozen over. Then you go from Chicago to Toronto where obviously it's going to be frigid up there too. And then we ended in Miami, which that's one thing doesn't go with the others, right? But in Miami, you know, we stayed in the same team hotel with the Boston Celtics, who played the Heat right after the Grizzlies played them. And Porzingis just walks through the hall, you know, the lobby, and you know, you look at him, you're like, wow, man, human beings just aren't built this way, right? And I said the same thing about Wembanyama. But when you talk about the skill set that he has to Boston, he gives them a defensive presence and an offensive finisher. Those guys are multiple. They got 3-point shooters at every position. They got ball handlers at every position. They got guys who know how to defend at every position. And they're the most complete team. And Porzingis has helped them. Porzingis and Drew Holiday at the head and the tail of that team, you know, are phenomenal role players. They got superstars playing roles in Boston, and they're playing fantastic with it.
Let's step aside and take a break. Come back. We're going to talk more with Mike Wallace. We want to talk about the Suns. We want to talk about some other firings in terms of the NBA. We'll do that momentarily. Keep it locked. We're back here on the program. We are talking NBA, and who better to talk it with? Who more knowledgeable of the NBA than Mike Wallace, the senior editor of Grind City Media? Follow him on Twitter at MyMikeCheck. Also, you can follow all of his great work at grindcitymedia.com. The Suns. Look, I know the Suns took a lot of heat, and rightfully so, because the record maybe if you go back a couple of weeks ago, maybe 4 games over 500, hadn't played well. Bill, you look at him, he's always injured. You know, maybe Kevin Durant is getting older. I would say Booker's trying to hold it down. But all of a sudden, you look at the last week, the Suns are playing well. Do you think this is, in fact, the way the Suns are playing now, in fact, a turnaround that will get the Suns perhaps back near the top of the Western Conference?
This is what they were making all these trades and spending all this money to do, right? The stretch that they've been in January has changed their trajectory, and they're doing it defensively. Bradley Beal had to come back and sustain some time and put some games together to trust his body again. Devin Booker, you knew that if he just had the balance and the help, that he was going to be able to give you a 50-piece one week and a 38-point game the next week, and just his scoring. And what's been remarkable about Phoenix is that Kevin Durant, for the most part, has stayed healthy, and Beal and Booker have been interchangeable in that backcourt. Both of those guys have learned how to play the point guard. They are fine with distributing the ball to each other, and they play absolutely beautiful basketball together. And they're selfless when it comes to that. The question about Phoenix was always going to be their role players, and did they have enough depth to get them beyond and past what they needed to get to? So when you see some of their role players play the way that they've been playing, you know, I just think back to, you know, Nurkic being trusted and reliable as a big, giving you double-doubles when it comes to that. Grayson Allen has had some good games in there in terms of doing some of the things that he's been able to do. So they've been able to have some guys to step up and augment and supplement that big three. And if they can stay healthy, man, they're going to be dangerous. Nobody's going to want to see that kind of weaponry and firepower when you get down the stretch running into the playoffs.
Your thoughts on the Pistons, not necessarily this year, but moving forward?
Yeah.
Because when you look at games, I mean, you're looking at, okay, if the Pistons play San Antonio, the Wizards, the Hornets, they stand a good shot at getting a win, although they lost to San Antonio the last time, but beat Charlotte this week, beat the Wizards. Also, Monty Williams got that big contract. Like, I get it, it's a rebuild, but it seems like the Pistons have been rebuilding. What's the problem? What does Detroit look like moving beyond this year? Like, can they get it back on the right track? I guess is my question.
They were I had them as one of my dark horse teams to watch just because of the collection of young talent. When I saw Jalen Duren and Cade Cunningham on the USA Select team as they were preparing the FIBA World Cup USA team this past summer in Las Vegas, those two guys look like they belong. I almost walked up to Steve Kerr and Grant Hill and said, hey, you left two guys off of your regular roster who should have been there because of the way Cunningham and Duren dominated in some of those scrimmage sessions. And I said, if those guys can take the next step in terms of maturity and development and stay healthy, Detroit has the bookends of what they need. And then when you add in some of the other young pieces that they've had there, and Jaden Ivey, obviously, and Thompson twin, you felt like you were building something moving forward. And then the wheels just fell off. I know Monty, Monty. I went to high school with Monty, and it's been hard to see him have to go through what he's gone through. The owner, Gore, came out and said, hey, changes will be made with the roster, with the front office if necessary. The only thing we won't do right now is change the coach because we just invested in him. So that was reassuring to a certain point. But Detroit, man, they will go as far as sort of Cunningham takes him. And it was kind of it was curious to me that they started winning after he got hurt this time. And they finished games better without him in the last couple of weeks or during that stretch. He's a phenomenal talent. He just has to learn how to win, and he has to learn how to play his best and most efficient basketball in the second half of the fourth quarters. They're in it with everybody. They just can't close, and that's been their problem all year. Hopefully that'll improve as they get older and they try to retool the roster and get some of these young guys out and get some veterans who can help them win right now in there as well.
Couple of more thoughts with Mike Wallace as we talk some NBA here on the program. Let's talk Grizzlies, man. I felt like, wow, 6-3 with Ja Morant. I don't know what the trajectory of that is, but if you're winning 6 of every 9 games, let's say, and Ja Morant is healthy throughout the course of the season, that's gonna put you back into this race.
Yeah.
Now he has the unfortunate injury that is he's now out for the season. I know it's got to be disappointing there in Memphis. Is there any way with what Ja gave them that the Grizzlies can sort of make some kind of run, at least to try to get in that play-in situation?
As devastating as the blow to Ja was, and it is devastating, to come to miss the 25 games because of the suspension, come back for 9, captivate the entire league with the way you're playing over that 9-game stretch, and then go out with a season-ending shoulder surgery is demoralizing. But I think even more so is that Ja is just one of what now is 8 to 9 players on the injury report. You know what I mean? You lost Ja, and then you lost Marcus Smart. Then you lost Desmond Bane. You've already been without Steven Adams and Brandon Clark. And then the hits just keep coming, right? You know what I mean? It just keeps coming. And that's what's been demoralizing, because without Ja, this team could still contest for a play-in and try to back their way into a playoff spot. But without Ja, Desmond, and Marcus, it's really, really tough. Now, having said that, they just split a 4-game road trip. Should have beat Minnesota, but lost in the fourth quarter after Minnesota came back. Lost to Chicago, but then beat Toronto and Miami. So this team is flirting right around 500, even with all of these injuries, because they're relying on young guys. Vince Williams Jr., G.G. Jackson has emerged. Scottie Pippen Jr. just signed with the team last week, had a great game in Miami to end that trip. And then you're seeing, end of the bench role players, John Conchar, David Roddy. Those guys are playing well around Jaren Jackson Jr., who's been the one constant of the vets that have played the whole way through. So we'll see where this season goes. It's gone from one where they were destined for a playoff to now being a developmental project. And if they get to the play-in, that's bonus. But if not, then you're looking forward to next year when guys can hopefully be healthy.
Last thought, Mike, and we appreciate the time. The Washington Wizards parted ways with their head coach, Wes Unseld Jr. It's just been a bad season for the Wizards, probably more so from a defensive perspective, because, I mean, the Wizards can score points. Your thoughts, first of all, on the firing of
Yeah.
Unseld Jr. and then the Wizards moving forward?
It's I think the timing of it is what probably raises a little bit of a red flag. I mean, when a team is underperforming at the rate that the Wizards are, whether you call it a rebuilding year, a reload year, a retool year, they have guys that you look at. Tyus Jones. I mean, he was in Memphis. He's a very, very good point guard. Jordan Poole, went there and you said, okay, we're willing to take on his contract. Kyle Kuzma was a guy that they prioritized in free agency. I like Daniel Gafford as a big. You know what I mean? I think he's one of the more productive guys there. Then you have Bilal there, the young guy that you took in the draft, who played with Victor Wembanyama over in France. What were you expecting to do with that team? You know what I mean? In the East, you weren't going to be in the top half of the East with that kind of roster, even with those, guys who can score, but you just never had continuity. Wes Unseld Jr. was a defensive-minded guy, and the offense is okay, but the defense never got fixed. So it's hard for me to say, hey, he shouldn't have been let go or moved on from, because you're going to do that anyway. It was just a matter of time. But to do it now and you bring in someone, I don't know if you're going to change the results this year. So that's the question. What are you looking to do in the next year or two with your team? And with all the talk about that team transitioning back over to the Virginia side of things, just the PR timing of it and the hits just keep coming right now. So I feel for my hometown, my Wizards, they'll always be the Bullets to me. Wes Unseld Jr. is a good guy, really, really is a good guy. I don't think we've seen the last of him in a high-level NBA position as either a head coach or a top assistant somewhere. So, I understand the move. It's part of the basketball business right now, but it's just not a good time in DC for basketball. It hasn't been that way in years.
Mike Wallace is the senior editor of Grind City Media. And let me say this for our listeners and those that are going to watch this. You probably won't see or hear a program where you have the excellent analyst who's an HBCU grad who knows the NBA, and then a host who's also an HBCU grad. And the beauty of it, Mike is, of course, the senior editor of Grind City Media, which does so much college, HBCU, obviously NBA, and the Memphis Grizzlies. Give them a look and a listen at, of course, grindcitymedia.com. Mike Wallace joining us here on the program. Always great to catch up with you, Mike. Look forward to talking with you and talking some more NBA with you.
Hey, anytime, man. Anytime. I'm looking forward to it too, man. We got a lot to get to in this. Hopefully spring comes soon, blow off all of this cold and snow, and then we get towards the summer and the playoffs. I'm looking forward to it.